And he is a consistent voice on Of, By, and For the People, Eric Buchanan. What's up, Eric Buchanan?
Hey, Clint, how are you?
Man, I am good. I'm going to mute and clear my throat. I'm not sick. I just didn't want to put that in everybody's ear. So listen, normally, and we may have a surprise guest drop in here. I don't know yet. We'll see how this works. But today it's me and you, and we have some other conversations scheduled coming up soon with different voices. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think we're at a loss for things to talk about today. What do you think?
Yeah. So it's the Monday morning after one hell of a week, and I haven't even made any notes. So recap this really fast. The big news of the last week was supposed to be the control of the U.S. Senate and their Senate Georgia races. That happened on Tuesday. That was going to be pretty big news. Reasonably close, surprising to some. Margins changed from the presidential election to the actual Senate races. Democrats won. They have 50 votes, plus the vice president is the president of the Senate. So they're going to have control of the Senate. So the Democrats control the Senate, the House, and the presidency. And then Wednesday, which is supposed to be the day that the Electoral College votes are counted, it's been traditionally seen as a ceremonial day in most respects. Theoretically, there's some debate about what can happen if people object to the electors and the process has gone through. And Trump called for a big rally that ended up in what in the Navy, what we would have called a Charlie Foxtrot. Things got out of hand. I think it was a small number of people, but it was still people that did stuff that was horribly inappropriate, stuff that I've condemned publicly, and I'm going to condemn it again today. You never should in the United States allow any violence to influence politics, especially not in our nation's Capitol building. I have real concerns, real problems about that, and those people should be prosecuted and punished in accordance with the law. But putting it in context, there's a lot to talk about. And then there's a question of where do we move forward from here as a country? And where do conservatives move forward from here? How do we deal with this? And what was the role of social media and media bias and incomplete news in this whole stream of events? There's lots to talk about.
Well, I'm going to throw my 2 cents out there before we get too far down the rabbit holes. And I love feedback and comments, so I want to make sure we encourage people to do that, and we'll pull them up. So I've said this a bunch, and I'm not saying it because you're not smart enough or we're not smart enough to remember it, but I do think it's important to be reminded of it when you get emotions involved. More than one thing can be true at the same time. It's not always in life either ors. Now, sometimes it is, but a lot of times either or situations come because we make it that way. And so it is possible for me to say this. Those who did what they did at our Capitol last week on January 6th deserve to be arrested, prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And I want to say I condemn it, 100% condemn it, period. In that thought, that lives in a constant thought bubble by itself. I condemn it just as much as I condemned all the other riots for the last 6 months, 8 months. One does not justify the other, and that's in its own little thought bubble. Now this is the other one that really bothers me. It's our turn now, people that I see out there, and I'm not saying that it's not tempting to do, and I'm not telling you I haven't done it. I'm not telling you there's part of you that may not feel good when it happens, but if you're saying to yourself, oh, but they were mostly peaceful. Well, at the end of the day, mostly peaceful didn't work for someone else's violence, and it sure as hell shouldn't work for this violence. If you're one of those people that believes in respecting the law, Blue Lives Matter, well, it matters when it's your side that's protesting just as much as it matters when it's the other side that's protesting. Now, with that being said, I wish, and I posted this, I wish the Democrats and the Republicans had come out hand in hand all summer long and listened to the people that need to be listened to, but condemned what happened together, and it might have quelled the summer's violence. I wish now Republicans and Democrats would come out hand in hand and condemn it. Here's what I see, though. I don't see, and I'm not telling you it's not out there. So everybody goes, it's not because you're looking. I'm one person and I'm not a news organization, right? It's my opinion. I don't see as many people saying that it's okay. In other words, almost everybody I know is saying what happened in the Capitol is a travesty. It is insurrect. It's what they tried to do. The only thing that I think makes a little difference, Eric, and this is where I'll trust your opinions. I think it's, if you're attacking a private business, it's horrible. Go to jail. If you're attacking a federal building in Minneapolis, New York, wherever you're at, when you start going into our Capitol, it's hard for me to say that's a patriotic thing to do at this stage, because I think we had not exhausted the conversation part of it. We had not exhausted the debate. Let's talk about it. I find it very difficult not to look at that and say people that think that's okay, that thought's the problem. Am I wrong there? Because I think that's different. That to me that's got a taste of something different when you start attacking the Capitol. Or am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're 100% correct. I think attacking the Capitol, doing violence inside the Capitol, absolutely not. That's as un-American as you can get. You can't do that. Interestingly, as soon as you started talking, somebody popped up with Jay Bell a couple questions.
What's up, Jay?
Small number. Jay, thanks for chiming in.
Yeah.
A mob bludgeoned a federal police officer to death. That's pretty out of hand. 100% agree.
Yeah.
No one should ever. That they should be punished. That's murder. The woman who was killed when they were trying to get into the and I guess it was the House, or was it the Senate? Whichever one it was, she was trying to get. Senate, but I'm not. Yeah, sure. She was standing near apparently people that were trying to bust open that door. You can't go bust open doors, even if you were peaceably allowed into the hallways. You can't go bust in the door. It's just insane. You got to stop doing that. Now, one of the things I think is extremely important, if we're going to start punishing people, which we should, if we're going to start holding people accountable, which we should, is it's really hard to understand exactly what happened. And I had a VMI classmate who was there but didn't go into the Capitol building, who gave me one perspective. I've been listening to podcasts from conservatives who condemned what happened and have explained certain things. I have tried to watch the news, and there's these stories going on all over the place, and some of them, maybe all of them, are true. There were definitely people climbing in. There were definitely people that broke a window. There were also people saying that they were let in, and I've seen video of police officers inside the Capitol saying, "Hi, don't do anything wrong. I don't agree with you, but come on in." And gates being open, that kind of stuff. I'm just going to say this. I don't know. I absolutely don't know what happened that day. I wasn't there. And even if I was there, I would have only seen a small part of it. So what actually happened to that police officer? Well, the bottom line is we know that there was some violence that happened and he died. That's not okay. There was also that woman who was an Air Force veteran who was killed by a Capitol police officer. Was that a legitimate shooting? Well, I think you give the doubt to the police officer, absolutely, because if somebody was trying to bust into the door where our seat of government,
what they got, he doesn't know if that, and I feel bad for. It's a tragedy. He has no idea what's on the other side of that door that's trying to come in.
I backed the blue then, and I back the blue now, and that's what I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to. Doesn't mean that over time we shouldn't try to find out exactly what happened. And who knows what actually happened, and that's the point.
Hey, Jay, I think what he's talking about is, and here's the other thing, I'll throw this out there real quick. When we say stuff like this, I think he's talking, there's specific videos out there that show things being moved, doors being open. I don't think it's a reflection on the dozens of officers that were seriously injured defending. Again, more than one thing can be true. It can be some doors that were let open and it seemed like it was peaceful, and then in other areas was going, batshit crazy. So it was a tragedy that they're all killed and that she shouldn't have been attacking the Capitol. Everybody's in agreement on this. The problem we're having, though, is we ought to be able to, just like our elections, though, we ought to be able to talk and ask questions. We talked and asked questions all summer about things. We talked and asked questions all for 4 years about things, for 12 years. Asking the questions and looking at an incident, it's hard to point at one thing and go, it's all of this, because it's never just all of one thing. Now, not always. Sometimes there are exceptions to the rule. But inside what happened at our Capitol are a lot of different things. And what we see is the tragedies and the atrocities that happened at the Capitol. That's what's getting our focus, as it should. But that doesn't mean how did we get to that point. We should talk about how we got to that point.
So something I do want to address. So I think everybody's in agreement, and there can be no doubt that no one should use violence. That no one should be threatening violence. No one should be using violence as a tool to affect politics or affect our government. That's absolutely forbidden, and anybody that did it should be punished. And Jay, I really appreciate your questions, your comments. I've got the same questions. I think those things you're describing happened. I think some other stuff happened. I've seen videos of some of the peaceful protesters cleaning up a knocked over garbage can because they were trying to do the right thing. At the same time, there are people that went into some of the representatives' offices and trashed them. All this stuff is horrible. And some of maybe there were some good people in there who or just got carried away with the moment. But when people are getting killed and people are getting attacked, none of it ultimately is okay. And all I'm saying is, Jay, the stuff that you're bringing up is important. Let's try to find out exactly what happened, which I think will happen eventually in courts of law, and we'll find out. But at the end of the day, those are exactly why everybody agrees what happened was wrong, is that those bad things happened, and maybe more.
Yes.
And who knows what else happened. So let's move on just a step beyond that. It's not because I'm belittling it, because it is so important to recognize that it was not okay. But I think there's a whole lot that led up to where we are. And part of it, honestly, as a conservative, I've got to say, I don't think people understood what January 6th is all about. And this, you had a good podcast for me to listen to, Clint, that I've started, but I haven't finished yet, that Congressman Crenshaw is breaking down.
With Trey Gowdy.
Yeah, and I haven't got to that part yet, but some of it rings absolutely. I mean, it is true, and it's a great explanation. And anybody who wants to hear more details on that should go to Dan Crenshaw's podcast and listen to the most recent one, because it's got a good explanation of what was supposed to and actually did eventually happen on January 6th when the Electoral College was approved. And I think this is one of the places where why were good people in Washington, D.C. protesting? Maybe they thought the election results were invalid. Maybe they wanted to protest the fraud. Maybe they wanted to suggest that we should be looking more into the questions of what happened during the election. I think some of those questions are valid. Some of those things are reasonable to protest over. But there was part of the impetus for the crowd to be there was because the Electoral College votes were being counted in the House and the Senate. And the suggestion was made that if you put enough pressure on congressmen and senators, that they can and should reject the votes from the Electoral College
and from the vice president too. And that was
and pressure on the vice president.
Yeah.
And I think all those things were wrong. I think putting that political pressure on them to do that, I think, is inappropriate. It's unconstitutional. Let me make this one big, clear, simple statement. I think there are some good things that Donald Trump did as president, but at the end of the day, he's not a constitutionalist. And I think he said some stuff, and he let people on his behalf say some stuff that allowed people to have false hope that doing something in Washington, D.C. on January 6th was going to change anything. Let's say, for the sake of argument, and we can debate this separately for anybody who wants to dig as deep as I've been digging. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that there are legitimate questions about the constitutionality of the election, the way the electors were picked in the states, et cetera, maybe voter fraud, maybe voting machines. I know people are going to say, well, there were 60 courts that said well, okay, fine. I'm saying for the sake of argument, not that I'm disagreeing with that. For the sake of argument, there were legitimate questions, and people have a good faith basis to be saying, hey, was this election fair? The way that gets resolved in the United States is the state laws that apply in that state for confirming the electors have to be followed. And in most cases, there's no doubt they were followed. And that includes having them certified by the state election commission or the secretary of state, however it is done. And if that happens and one party or the other still thinks it's fraudulent, there is a way to go through the court process. And maybe the court process could have done more this time to answer some questions. I think that's a different discussion. But the court process didn't do anything to change what was going on with the election. That's the remedy. That's the path to do something about it if you legitimately have a complaint. And when you start talking, and when I say you, I kind of mean President Trump and his people, when they start saying, hey, come to Washington, D.C., let's see if we can get Congress to fix this problem that I think happened, and that a lot of people may have legitimately thought was true, or at least they were led to believe it was true. I've still got questions about some stuff, but it doesn't mean I believe that the electors were fraudulently elected. But we still have questions. Well, how did we get here? What happened with some of this weird stuff? Why did it happen? Why do we even think it happened that way? That's a different conversation. But the point is, no matter what, whether you have a legitimate question or an illegitimate question, at the end of the day, the way to fix it is not to try to convince Congress to not count the electoral votes on January 6th. And misleading people into thinking this was a chance to do something about it had them more fired up than they should have. And so when President Trump says we're going to go over there and protest peacefully, but we're going to protest, okay, it's okay to peacefully protest. But then he said something about suggesting to Congress, telling Congress that they should do the right thing. That's giving people false hope. That's encouraging them to go protest, even if it's just a peaceful protest.
Also, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, and a peaceful protest might be, that's permitted. That's what the First Amendment protects. And that might have been a legitimate way for people to blow off steam. Going inside the Capitol technically is not illegal if you were let in, but as soon as you either broke in or as soon as people were trying to disrupt what happened, even if it was just by yelling while Congress was in session, if you wanted to go in there and stand around the hallways while Congress is in session and somebody let you in, is that a peaceful protest? Probably. It's happened in other state houses. It's happened in the Capitol before. You could go do a sit-in in one of the senator's offices as long as you're doing it peacefully. At some point, they can force you out because they are allowed to ask you to leave because it becomes trespassing. But I think it's a legitimate form of protest that both sides have done in the past, is to go in there peacefully. And maybe some stories where these people are let in. But as soon as you go in there and start acting violently, then I think there's a real problem, and that's not permitted.
Let me jump in. Let me jump in real quick and say a couple things, and then we'll bring up a couple more comments. When you say things like the vice president has failed at his duties, which is Trump said, and by the way, I voted for Trump, and I've said this 1,000 times. If you're going to come on this podcast or you're going to make comments, that's great. Understand, I and Eric, I know Eric a little bit because I've had conversations with him, but I've 100% always said, protesting, peaceful protesting is 100% what we should be doing. The violence, whether it's in Minneapolis or whether it's in DC, is slammed. Shouldn't be happening at this point. It should not be happening. But when you say certain things, if rhetoric matters when Donald Trump says it, it also matters when the media says it. It also matters when Democrats say it. You cannot say rhetoric only matters when the other team says it. And I will lose this fight by saying this. If people want the other team to hold themselves accountable, then you better hold your own team accountable as much, because I see the problem, and we're going to pull up some of your comments in a minute, Trey. Yes, it's unchecked government, but the government stays checked by us checking ourselves. And once I start supporting a personality or a party over my country, that's when the problems happen. Once you start, if you're a Democrat leader in the summer and you're giving everybody allowances to take it from a peaceful protest to rioting, and you're making allowances for it, you need to shut up. You need to be quiet. You need to stop acting like all of a sudden it matters. And it's the same with the Republicans. If you're one of those people that I see posting, and I get it, you're trying to be funny, it's sarcastic, you're trying to get a bunch of likes, but it's, hey, it was mostly peaceful. Well, if that's what you're saying now, and you were giving people shit 4 months ago, 6 months ago, then that's kind of on you. I get it. It's good for clicks, and it's a great way to make a point. I understand it. But I got kids, man. I don't want to see my kids. I've grown up watching other countries live this Democrat. It's mob rule. Get rid of electoral college. It's mob rule. I have watched on the news that other countries have ripped themselves apart because this party has control, and now they impose their will on the other party, and they don't care. Now there's violence in the streets. I don't want that for my teenage kids. I don't want that for my grandkids. And I'll be damned if I'm going to get labeled something from a Democrat or a Republican that tells me that if I don't support a party over the country, that I'm the problem. I disagree. You're the problem. And we're not going to get past the I'm the problem, you're the problem unless we listen to each other. And you don't listen to each other if you're freaking, killing police officers running into the Capitol. And I'm not going to keep referring back to the summer. We're talking just about this. It's holding our team accountable. And if those people don't represent me, I can still vote conservative and Republican and still denounce those other people that call themselves Republicans and conservatives if they're doing something that I think goes against the American code. Now, does any of that make sense, or did I just ramble?
Good job, Clint.
Right, here we go. Let me pull up some comments, and you kind of field these questions there, Eric. Encourage them. You know what? Encourage them. Unchecked government.
So it's an absolutely fair point right now to say that our political parties, Republicans and Democrats, both have a tendency to go beyond the powers authorized and granted to them by the Constitution, and that there is a big fight right now going on whether or not people even want to think, well, it's a good idea to even follow the Constitution, because I can think of these historical arguments about why the Constitution may not be fair to everybody. I don't know what's going on. And the answer to this is we got to quit arguing over whether the Constitution applies. That's one of the problems. The Constitution is the rule book. You start with the Constitution, and if people are not following the Constitution has methods to address those things.
That's right.
And one of those things, by the way, is not armed rebellion, unless things have become so totalitarian that you want to go back to 1776 and dissolve the bond that holds together. And I am not suggesting that, and I would never suggest that. And damn it, anybody who does suggest that, 1776 was the one time that this country ever needs to do something like that. And every other lesson since then is you just don't do that kind of stuff.
You're already getting pushback. Somebody's already calling you.
Somebody's already calling me.
I want to say this, what you're saying, though, because if people are saying that's what it's come to, understand that I'm not going to go down that road as fast with you, because, again, my kids are going to be the one in the streets. I'm old. And here's what I have said forever. Eric, you're a veteran. My dad served 3 tours in Vietnam. Violent men that have served know what it cost. And most of the time, not all the time, I'm not saying there's not most of the time, men who have experienced violence are the last ones that want violence, because they know the cost of violence and they know the consequences of violence. And my problem with this is, for all these people that are saying it's okay, you don't understand the tube and the toothpaste concept. Once you start going down that road and you're saying, I justify what happens because I feel I have a right, when you say that, then you lose credibility when you're saying the other team doesn't have the right. And I don't think we're at that point yet. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Eric, but I was letting you answer your phone. I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. And I apologize for not turning my phone off. Let's go through a couple more of these. But you brought up a good point. Your dad was a veteran. I keep this on the back of my chair right here. Those are the wings of a naval aviator. That's the last squadron I served on active duty. And that's the set of patches that I earned flying P3s for the United States. The United States, not the Republicans, not the Democrats, not the Libertarians. I served the United States of America, and I'm proud to have done it. There may have been some veterans that were there at the Capitol. There were a lot of veterans, and I've talked to one of my classmates from VMI who was there with the protest. At least I've exchanged messages with him, who had no intent to do anything violent or anything illegal. And some people did some stuff. And when I use the word get out of hand, because I don't know exactly what happened that day, but they did stuff they should have known damn well better. And if you're a veteran, if you're somebody who loves the United States and you're a patriot, you cannot allow ever somebody to use violence to affect politics in the United States. And as conservatives, we hold ourselves to that standard, and liberals should hold themselves to that standard. And we can have a different debate about how the atmosphere gets changed when certain politicians, I don't care what the other or the media, if they want to justify it, I'm going to condemn them for trying to justify violence at any time, whether we're on the right or the left. But by God, the side that I want to help, if I'm going to be on a side politically, better damn well be on the side of no violence? Let's go through some more of these questions. I think these are
well, and the last thing I'll say about this, and I'll read this one, is one of the issues is when it's happening from people that you say you're on the same, you believe in the same policies and the same policies as far as the whatever party you're affiliated with. When you see it happen, and there's 1,000, and let's go back to the Summer R now. There's 1,000 people, and 100 of them or 200 get violent. It's up to your people, your party, to stand up and go, no. Like what we're doing right now. We got to cut that out of the party, and you should do it on the Democrat side, and you should do it on the Republican side. Trey, both sides lie like hell. You can't understand how the populace reacts irrationally. You want to take it, or you want me to take it?
Well, let me start with this. I read something interesting that somebody posted an article on Facebook, and because it's an article, it was just somebody's thoughts, but it struck with me that there has been a way that people have looked at society for the last few years, and that instead of there being the truth, there is your truth, and that there are these subjective narratives, and that's what people should believe in. That I've actually had friends flat out tell me, I don't need to know what the facts are. I know what I believe. And you're not allowed to question that, because I have my life experiences, and I believe what I believe. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that that's a legitimate way to look at the world. If that's the way some people want to do it, okay, fine. Then what happens if there's somebody else who has their truth, their way of looking at the world, and it's not the same as yours? Don't get mad that they don't agree with you. They're allowed to do the same thing. And ultimately, you have more than one narrative, 2 narratives, 3 narratives going on. And if we're not concerned about what the actual objective truth is, which is what some people have been taught, then it's all baloney. It's all bullcrap. And nothing matters except.
Well, it comes down to raw physical power now. That's what happens.
It comes down to power. Who can beat up who, and that's why you have violence in the streets, because it's no longer about the truth. So if you're not allowed to ask questions and find out what the truth is, the short answer is, Trey, I'm with you. That's a great question to ask. And one answer to that is, we've got to get back to insisting that people operate from the facts and objective truth. And let me say the second part. And it's coming up with another question I think that somebody asked. The media right now is probably the most polarizing source in America, because as a person who leans to the right, I might read one set of news sources. A person who leans to the left reads another set of news sources. And if we ever find the opportunity to even talk to each other, the beginning of the conversation is all about, well, how can you believe how can you agree with such and such happened? And the other person says, such and such didn't happen. The opposite happened. Mm-hmm. My guy didn't do it. Your guy did it. And the next thing you know, the whole argument is about the set of facts, because we can't agree on facts as Americans anymore. And I'm going to flat out blame the media for that. People in the media no longer think it's their job to report the facts. People in the media think it's their job to report opinions. And it's both right and left. Mainstream media tends to be more left. I find lots of news sources out there that are on the right that'll do the same thing, that they're not really news. It's opinion. And they're not shy about saying their opinion. And unfortunately, and this is the ongoing problem, you have to dig deep to find out what the actual damn facts are. Mm-hmm. And this is what we were talking about with Jay at the beginning with his good questions. We know certain things happen in the Capitol. We don't have the full context of everything. We're not excusing it. But at this point, we don't have the whole story of what happened. And hopefully we're going to learn as time goes by. But right now, I'm hearing everything from the word shenanigans, which is also how the election was described, all the way up to armed insurrection and domestic terrorism.
Well,
none of those helps us learn exactly what happened.
Well, real quick,
should be punished.
And I want to say this, and I'm going to throw the word elections in here. I want to go back 3 or 4 conversations, Eric, that we had, and I think we may have had it with Clay or John. I can't remember who was on with us, but if you're watching this and you want to blame the media, then let's put a little bit of the blame on the media. If you want to blame our leaders, let's put some blame on our leaders. If you want to blame the other party, put some blame on the other party. You also need to put a lot of blame on your own party. But the flip side of it is, as an individual, if Eric and Clint and Bob and Sue and Sally cannot ask questions about our election, because I remember we've said this so many times, Eric, we're not asking questions specifically. We're not asking questions about this election specifically as far as changing the results. We figured out over time the results are what they were going to be. We were asking questions. So how do we avoid this the next election? If you're telling me you got to call me a name or tell me I'm a conspiracy theorist for asking questions, again, I'll say it. There's not a business out there that doesn't do an event or have something go on in life that after the event, they don't sit down and evaluate it and see if it was what could work better, what went right, and what went wrong. You should be able to ask questions about the election without having to pick a damn team. And when you say to me, and this is the part that gets me, I've heard shenanigans and I've heard insurrection, and there's probably truth in both of them. The bottom line is the consequences. People died and people acted un-American. I really don't give a damn who you voted for. I don't care who you voted for. Because before there was Republicans and before there was all this other stuff, there was this concept of trying to have a free country. And so I really don't care who you voted for. If that's how you're going to solve the problem, again, that's a dangerous road to go down. I just want to make sure I pull it up. Ronnie Dodd, yes, media is our worst enemy, by the way.
I think we just covered that, and that's and we can keep covering that.
Well, and he's a great guy to learn some gun safety from too.
But the whole idea of what media source out there right now do you think is dedicated to reporting the objective truth? There's a few places that are starting to do that, but then they're kind of shallow. They just don't want to dig in. So we don't have the reliable media. Did we ever have it, or did we just have fewer sources?
I want to hit these questions.
Let's keep going.
Yeah. So because Jay's asking some good questions down the road, we need to scrub the two-party Coke versus Pepsi system. I call it football, but I agree. Everybody waves their foam finger. Every member of Congress pays to play within their own constituents. You pay to get on the floor. Where does that money come from? Lobbyists. They called bribery to common folks. Well, we did an episode on crony capitalism.
So there's crony capitalism, which I define as the businesses paying the government money to get laws passed to make it easier for them. I think a great example is big tech. Big tech has an exemption that they can't be sued for their content. Well, how did they get that? They lobbied for that to be put in the law. And the original promise was, well, we're going to be neutral and we're not going to take stuff down or criticize it or create our own content. Look at Facebook today. Look at any of the big sources today. They fact check everything. I've seen them fact, by the way, left and right. I have a friend of mine, a guy I went to VMI with, who's an African-American history professor, and he and I don't agree politically, but we've had good discussions. And he posted some pictures, and Facebook fact checked him. So they're fact checking both sides. But they shouldn't be fact checking at all. Let's keep going through these questions.
Because Ken Meyer, I want to make sure we say thank you to everybody. Ken Meyer said, bingo. Thank you, Ken. All right, so let's get into these right here. Jay, ask all we want, then take it to the courts and let them decide they decided. Do you want to take this one first, or do you want me to?
Yeah, so a couple. Jay, you're absolutely right in terms of the outcome of this election. I'll agree with that. The courts have decided. None of them are ruled to change anything. We're done talking about who should be president in 10 days. That's clear. Now, I will say that I think it's a legitimate question for people to ask, well, what happened? How did we get, what changed this time? Was there anything that was fraudulent that needs to be fixed in the future? Were some of the rules changed in a way that we should fix going forward in the future? I've read statistics somewhere between 35 and 40% of the population thinks the election was fraudulent or was unfair. Well, can we at least ask the questions of what was it that they're concerned about and go back and show people why that's not true? I've heard this. It's these talking points. 60 courts have ruled against Trump. Counter talking point. 0 of those cases have done an evidentiary hearing and actually considered the evidence. We're just going to argue back and forth over that. I think the courts maybe could have done a better job of actually looking at some of the evidence and said, thank you for presenting your evidence. We've looked at it now. Now let us have the court rule why that evidence was not enough to change anything. But just not having an evidentiary hearing at all, I don't like to criticize courts. I'm an attorney, but maybe one of the ways that courts play an important role is giving an outlet so the pressure doesn't keep building on the pressure cooker, and just rejecting any concerns kept the pressure on.
Well, what happens is the headline is courts reject Trump, which and they may have done that on evidence anyway. But that comes back to your question. And I'll say this real quick. I completely agree with Jay. My issue comes from, we ask questions, but I'm not talking just about leaders asking questions. I've been sick. And I've got everybody at a certain age probably has stuff they have to live with physically. But I have good doctors that say, Clint, your health care is your business. You need to ask questions. You need to make sure we're doing the right thing. You need to make sure things are going well for you. Well, it's the same with our freedom. I don't think there's anything wrong with taking stuff to the courts. That doesn't mean, though, as we, the people, shouldn't have these conversations, which used to happen around water coolers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's keep going.
Here we go. The courts decide the disputes. They looked at the evidence and decided end of story. I don't know if they all looked at the evidence.
Yeah, it just answered the question, Jay. I appreciate your comments, and you're a pretty smart person, I know. But that's one.
Real quick, he's some of the best homes in around Chattanooga.
Yeah, and that's a great point that the courts have decided, and no one's arguing about that. But to say that they looked at the evidence from what I've seen, in which single case did they actually look at the evidence? And if you can share that case with me, I'd like to see how the court said that. I do know that a court in Georgia said before the election they had serious concerns with the voting machines and hoped that people would look into it in more detail after if there turned out to be any problems.
Well, and so did the media. The media were concerned about voter fraud before the election.
HBO did a special. Senator Warren and 3 other Democratic senators expressed their concern. I'm not arguing that we should have overturned this election. What I am saying is, if you're just saying "shut up, it's been decided," then that's part of the pressure.
I don't think it's what he's saying.
Be upset.
But we lived for 4 years with, everybody saying, not from governors and both sides screamed this was not a fair election. Now, for the last 5 or 6 elections, this is Jay. Has any person anywhere been charged with voter fraud?
In 2020 or from the previous elections? Because I saw a list the other day of a lot of people that have been charged. I think it may be too soon in 2020.
And there's a lot of affidavits, though, too, right?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see if he gets pursued or not.
Let's go through here. Many newspapers have objective reporting.
I'd like to know which ones people think are objective. I have my point of view, and I find certain papers are more likely to agree with my point of view, and therefore I think, well, they're probably right. that makes sense. But which ones are they? Which ones can you find one where people all agree that they're objective? I think WGN in Chicago, their TV station, and they're the ones that used to carry the Cubs, kind of like TBS carried the Braves back when we were growing up. They have a nightly news broadcast now that they're saying it's objective news. And I've watched it a few times and I'm fine with it. It is objective news. The problem is it's shallow. It spent a lot of time on California wildfires and weather patterns and zoo animals. And they have not, at least I haven't watched them recently, but they didn't dig into the politics enough to give a neutral point of view. And that's awfully hard today to find. And some of the others, it's just, and if people are only trusting their own sources, then of course we're going to have this huge polarization, and that's part of the problem.
Well, and so I'll say 2 things about that. I think good reporting gets lost in the weeds. Like if everybody's a racist and the real racist can hide amongst them, if everybody is a traitor on the other side, then the real traitors can hide amongst them, and no one can. We can't all point to the bad things and go, "Hey, it's over there. There's the person that we need to really make sure we limit that belief as far as their influence." But so I think the objective reporting gets lost in the opinionated reporting. And I wrote this down, Eric. I'm not really sure, and Jay, I love this, but I'm not really sure that we want objective reporting. And I'm not talking about us like me. I'm just saying as a society, it seems like now if Eric were to tell me something right now that goes contrary to my belief, one of the first things I'm going to do is get defensive because all of a sudden you're coming after my team. And guess what, Eric? Where did you get your information? Now I got to question your source. And then I go, well, did you know they get their money from here? And so instead of ever investigating, is there a grain of truth in what Eric's saying? I'm going to spend my time just disproving Eric altogether. And that way I don't have to be wrong. I don't have to learn and I don't have to grow. All right, let's keep going. Sorry, man. Let's see. Let's go with this. Ronnie Dodd, bail-in mallets. I know the fix was in. We've addressed that. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that from a slightly different perspective. I am not going to agree the fix was in with mail-in ballots, but I am going to suggest that a reasonable question is, what changed? Did it significantly affect the election? And as a conservative, do the Republicans or any other conservative party have a chance in the future with the way that they're set up, or do they need to do a better job with the ground rules? Let me address what I'm talking about. in the previous election, 2016, there were 33 million mail-in ballots, whether it was absentee, true mail-in, whatever it is. The vote was submitted through the Postal Service. In 2020, it was 80 million, about 2.4 times as many. And the rejection rate in some states went down, which gives a little rise to suspicion, I think.
Substantially.
It was a 6% rejection rate in Georgia that went down to like a 0.5. So instead of having about the same percentage rejected or even more with all these new mail-in ballots, it went down. I think reasonable questions could be asked about how did that happen. There's the questions about how can you observe the ballots being opened if you have to get back 6 to 10 feet or even farther because of the coronavirus. I just think they're legitimate questions. And how do we ensure that we have integrity in the process next time if we're still going to have a lot of mail-in ballots? Jimmy Carter and Howard Baker worked on their commission on voter integrity, and one of the big concerns they had was mail-in ballots. And Jimmy Carter, I think, is a liberal, and their position was that they're more likely to have problems. And so I'd like to see it looked into, and how do we ensure that it's more likely the mail-in ballots, if we're going to have them, are going to be accurate. And a second problem is this. As a conservative, one of the questions that the Republican Party should be asking itself is, did we just lose this past election because we were outdone on the ground? Not in a way that was fraudulent, not in a way that was, maybe it was illegal, maybe not. We can talk about the constitutionality of changing some of these rules. But Trump got 74 million votes. That's more than anybody's ever gotten before, except Biden got 80 million. And with 80 million mail-in ballots, that suggest, and the Democrats themselves have said that the mail-in ballots were much more likely to go for them. So are we just going to, as conservatives, sit back and go, well, we're going to get beat with more mail-in ballots, or are they going to do, what do we need to do to up our ground game to make sure that we get more people voting for us? It's a fair question from a purely political, old-fashioned politics. The Democrats are famous for, in the old days, sending out a van around certain neighborhoods and rounding people up and say, hey, do you need a ride to go vote? And making sure people got a chance to vote. Probably a laudable thing to get as many people to vote as possible, but it also had the effect of ensuring that people were more likely to vote Democrat and got to the polls. The equivalent of that was increasing the mail-in ballots. The other thing kind of scratch your head about was $300+ million spent by Zuckerberg in certain areas to increase voter turnout. I don't know.
I think we're at a place now, though.
The Republicans need to pay attention to the ground game if they're going to remain competitive.
I think we're at a point now, though, where we got to understand that every big major company, high tech, the technology companies, other countries, everybody wants to influence our elections. And one of the issues I have when we read newspapers or we listen to certain things in news source, what we tend to say is, if they agree with me, there's no bias there. If they disagree with me, I've got to find a way out to show why there's bias there instead of thinking about it. I wrote two things down. First of all, before we leave this podcast, this is not the first time. It's the first time this way. But there have been moments in the past where the Electoral College has been challenged. I'm pretty sure of that. And that's happened in the past. Second, even if the mail-in vote, and we're not talking about absentee, but even if the mail-in voting, the ballots, worked, we should still ask how and why. Because if the mail-in ballots were 2.5 times more this time with a lower kickout rate, I would think we would want to sit back and say, how did Georgia do that so we can replicate it? So asking questions isn't the un-American thing to do. And if asking questions puts me in a basket, again, that's your fault for labeling people. Asking questions should not be a bad thing. That's how I'll end that part of it. Now, I want to go to this real quick because Jay Bell's chiming in with some good stuff, but so is Ken Meyer here. Eric just hit the nail on the most critical point. There's been no evidence presented to courts. They were rejected for lack of standing, political dodge, or simply not wanting to take such a controversial case. I agree with that. So, yeah, we covered that.
The one criticism I would say is I understand if I was a judge, I would not want to dig into election fraud. The problem is, what did they used to say on the People's Court, Clint, back in the day?
Oh, don't go down, Judge Watner.
Yeah, what did the guy say at the very end? Don't take the law into your own hands. Take them to court.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
that's what our court system is supposed to do. If the perception was, whether this is 100% true or not, but it was an easy selling point for the Trump team that the courts are not listening to us, not listening to you people, because they're not actually ruling or allowing the evidence to be presented. We're going to go present the evidence to these state legislators, whether that was legitimately what was going on, but they made the presentation that the courts were not addressing this stuff. And I think some courts maybe could have taken a more aggressive stance to at least, okay, yeah, give me your evidence. Let's look at it. Okay, this is not enough to change the election. But at the end of the day, if people don't have faith that the courts are going to address it, it's too easy a talking point to say, well, none of them looked at the evidence. Maybe someday some will, or at least let's make sure the rules and the systems are in place for next time. And that's, I think, the more legitimate concern.
Well, that's how you make changes. It's hard to know what changes to make or what side to come down on until you ask the questions and evaluate. Right. Tiffany, thank you very much. But God help us. I think that's the thing there. And God is with us. Let's do this one, Ken. My biggest issue are the secretaries of state, i.e. Pennsylvania, Georgia, and others, who unilaterally altered state election statutes without the consent of the elected legislature. I'm Eric, you can take it, but Dan Crenshaw just did a great podcast about this. Go to listen to Dan Crenshaw, because he kind of addresses where he draws the line between there were some conservative leaders that he calls out pretty strong about what they were saying could be done and could not be done and how it's supposed to work. But I agree with Ken a little bit on this. Eric, you can take it and we'll move on.
So let me set it up in the most simple way possible. Article 2, Section 1 sets up how the electors are supposed to be elected, and they're supposed to be elected in accordance with the procedures set out by the state legislature. So the basic constitutional question is, the classic one that was addressed this time: if Pennsylvania has a statute passed by the state legislature that says we only count mail-in votes that arrive by election day, and somebody sues the election commission and gets the election commission to agree to change the rule that they will look at ballots that arrived that were postmarked by election day. Well, that's clearly what the legislature of Pennsylvania said you could not do. So does that make the election in Pennsylvania invalid if they do that, especially if those extra votes coming in flip the election? Did it make it unconstitutional? And that's the question. That's one of the questions that Texas actually raised in their case that they filed, which was thrown out, not because that was wrong, but thrown out because Texas is not allowed to complain, according to the U.S. Supreme Court, about how Pennsylvania does that. I still think it's a fair question. How do you address that? And the Pennsylvania Supreme Court basically said before the election, when that issue was raised, well, it hasn't affected the election yet, so we're not going to address that question. And then they kind of did the same. They did something similar afterwards. They never really addressed that question clearly in Pennsylvania. And that's, maybe more people to learn some stuff if they addressed it differently. But that's the point of that question, is it okay? And I don't know what Dan Crenshaw has to say about that, because I haven't gotten that far in that podcast. But the counter argument is, even from a conservative point of view, if the change is ultimately blessed by a court in that state to say it's still consistent with the intent of the legislature, would that be okay? I think that's a debate that should be hammered out in the courts over time. And how do you set that up so the courts actually address that if you only have the window of 65 days or whatever, 90 days or whatever it is between the election and the swearing in, or between when the votes are counted? So it's tough stuff.
And two, let's be honest. I on a scale of 1 to 10, my legal expertise classes I took at East Ridge High School was probably a 1.5. Basically. So I don't know the details of the Pennsylvania state legislature, and I don't know, and I haven't read, and this is where you got to go to trust people. I have not read what the election commission can actually do inside the framework that's been given to them by their state. So they may have made changes that looks irregular to people in Tennessee. I don't know that. So I listen to people smarter than me, and I try to figure it out. I just know when smart people are raising their hand going, can we ask questions? And they're told to shut up. That's going to make me ask questions more. I'm going to be like, no. I don't want the smart people or me to be told to shut up. I want somebody to answer my question, and I don't want to be answered where I have to be labeled. Let's see. Jay Bell, he's giving us some good news sources. Wall Street Journal. You know what I found? I go back to this. I agree with all of this, Jay, except when they say something I don't like, and then I think they're 100% biased. If they agree with me, I love them, right?
I don't. I just Jay. Thanks. I just don't think there's consensus that the New York Times is an objective newspaper. Maybe it used to be.
Jay, we addressed this one. I wanted to pull this up real quick, Eric, because we addressed this at the very beginning. Yes, they were misled, and yes, that's where that Dan Crenshaw comes in. But I knew they were kind of. Me and Eric have been talking about this for a couple of weeks. I don't think anybody that's, at least I know, is talking about how they weren't misled, that could change things. Nothing was going to change what happened January 6th. Nothing.
But the people that were there and that were willing to listen to President Trump, did they believe something could change? And I think, unfortunately, they thought that. Did President Trump actually, in his own subjective
insinuate?
No, I'm talking about his own subjective belief. Did Donald J. Trump, in his own heart, did he actually believe that he could get something done? I don't know, but that's bad for him to have that thought. I've said at the beginning, he's not a constitutionalist. I think he did some great stuff as president, stuff in the Middle East, stuff for the economy, but he was never a constitutionalist. That's why I did
great for the economy. He was. That's the part of my hate is prior to this election, even during the pandemic, that big study that came out, I think it was through Gallup or something, I can't remember, but it's the study they've done every presidential election. Over 50%, like 56% of the people said they were better off now than they were 4 years ago. And that's in the pandemic. And I've said this 1,000 times. If you could carve out the great stuff from President Trump, I think it would be good stuff. The problem is that the personality gets in the way. And I should be able to say that without being kicked off my team. You've got to be able to say things about your own people. Everybody's always wanted to influence elections. Absolutely, Jay. I agree with that.
Amen.
Including us voters.
Yeah.
Us voters have wanted to influence a few elections too. Ken Meyer, yes, 2001, 5, and 17, when the electoral count was challenged.
Now, hang on right there. So the question we asked earlier has the Electoral College been challenged in the past? And the answer there wasn't a historical precedent for January 6th or whatever day that they're going to meet in the past. But in 1877, in that January, but the issue there was that some states had such screwed up systems that their Secretary of State and their legislatures separately approved different competing panels of electors. And so they did dump it on Congress in a way that was constitutional to figure out which one are you going to accept. That didn't happen in 2020. That actually didn't happen in 2001, 2005, or 2017. It didn't happen that there were competing states. Now, there were pro forma objections.
Weren't there a few senators in 2001 though that objected? I thought, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, but that was after Florida. But if you go back and you can find the stories that say it's okay to object because it's been happening for a while. I'm somewhere between. Those objections don't mean anything because they can't if they don't change it, and they shouldn't change it, and they're not allowed to change it unless you. The only chance for challenging it is when you really have what's close to a civil war, when you have states having, the governors dissolve the legislature and the legislature meets anyway in a secret meeting. They send in one panel, and somewhere else the Secretary of State, who was appointed by the governor after the legislature was dissolved, appoints a different panel, and then they send both panels to Washington, D.C. That's the kind of crap that happened in 1876, 1877, and we ended up having like one of the weirdest elections ever. But it hasn't happened. That was almost 150 years ago. And it took 150 years for us to have something where it even came close to being similar. And the bottom line is, it's not how you decide the election. Did Trump appoint a commission in 2016 to study voter fraud? How did that turn out? Now, I don't remember all the details, but I do recall that President Trump had taken some action to start going through the voter rolls in several states to try to figure out what the rate was of people who were not supposed to be on the voter rolls. And those cases, and those turned into court cases, and the court cases stopped that kind of audit on the grounds that it was affecting people's privacy.
But don't you want to purge your rolls every now and then of dead people and people that have moved and people that may be illegal? Don't you want that?
Well, you would think, but how do you
isn't that
How do
We
you
want to
do
influence
how do you
the
do that
election.
without affecting their privacy rights? And one of the problems we have is who's going to do that? Are you going to let the Democrats go through Tennessee's voter rolls and decide which Republicans are dead and which ones are alive? And in Pennsylvania, do you want to let the Republicans go in and decide which Democrat dead voters still don't get the vote? I don't know the details. I just remember there being something like that.
So, Eric, let me ask you this: you're a smart guy. I've said some. I throw the statements out and let you react to them. But why is that? Where have we lost that trust in each other? And why is it? I understand everybody goes, it's team politics, but I hear the words, but I don't understand why people can't hold their own media sources to a higher standard. I don't understand why you can't criticize Donald Trump and yet vote for the policies, or criticize Joe Biden but vote for his rhetoric. I don't understand that.
So, Clint, if I were to write more articles for, say, the Tennessee Conservative News talking about how good looking you are and how smart you are,
Yeah.
and how you're kind of really getting sexy the more you've been working
Oh,
out lately
yeah.
and dropping a little weight,
Yeah.
are you going to go complain about that to anybody?
I don't like your point, to be honest with you.
if the people are writing the stuff you want to hear and you want to agree with, then it's the other people that must be telling the stuff that's not true. And the
How do
problem
we fix it?
well, one of it goes back to holding the media accountable from the very beginning. When I took a class in journalism and I was on my college newspaper staff, it was just absolute dogma that your job was to report the facts. And if you want to write your thoughts about the facts or the opinions, there's an editorial page for that. Otherwise, report the facts.
Who, what, when, where, why, and sometimes how, and how.
Yeah, and do it in a pyramid and all that great stuff. Yeah. Lead with the most important part, then explain a little deeper, then all the journal. That's what you need to learn to be a good journalist.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the way, it became, I'm going to be a journalist because I want to change the world. I want to fix stuff. And so journalism became the place for activists and advocates, and there's no interest in keeping it to be objective. And it's both left and right. I've seen stuff this summer that I thought, oh boy, I really agree with that. That's great. And I go dig deeper and go, holy cow, that's a lie. That's not true. And that was a right-wing reporter. And I've seen that same kind of stuff on the left. And until we as Americans start asking for objective truth as being a priority in the media, I think we're going to continue to have this division. And the problem is there's just not enough reasons to do that. Like I said, Clint, I'm going to write those articles that talk about how cute you are.
Yeah.
And you're not going to have any reason to object to that.
Because that's true, though. Let's go. The other people that post stuff that's bad, that's the bad stuff.
So, Clint, I know you and I try to go just a little over an hour. So let me just kind of throw out a couple of thoughts for us to kind of talk about here toward the end. So we've talked a lot about the rules and how people were misled. And I think we're starting to better understand the mistakes that were made. And I'll just say this, in addition to Trump telling people that he might do something on January 6th, I think that President Trump also made a big mistake, whether it's and who knows what his subjective intent was, but the idea of dragging this out this long and asking for a rally, like that was going to do something. People, I'm not saying you don't have the right to protest, but the real question should have been, what can courts do? And are any of the courts willing to dig into this? And if the courts are not going to rule, having a rally in Washington, D.C. is not how you get courts to rule differently. Now, having said that, do courts sometimes get influenced by that? I've heard rumors, then there's stuff going around the internet that the Supreme Court didn't want to rule on the Texas case because they were afraid it would rile up people on the left. Is that true? I don't know. I doubt it's true. It's just one of those Facebook kind of bullcrap things going around. But the point is that there was a narrative going on that Trump was losing every lawsuit and he didn't have a basis for it. So how does he want to flip that narrative? Having a big rally? Well, I really don't think I don't think that was a horrible idea for him. Ultimately, let me just put it in a short way of explaining it. He let this get out of hand. He let this go on too long. And he misled people that on January 6th, something could be changed. So is it on his head that there was a really bad day in Washington, D.C.? Yes. Is it really his fault that he meant to incite a riot? Did he tell anybody to go inside the Capitol building? I don't think so, but he's had a lot of responsibility. At some point, he should have stopped this.
But at some point in time, though, when do we? I mean, this is the part that frustrates me. Yes, we should hold President Trump accountable for his words. Absolutely. Again, period. Two separate thoughts. That's in its own little bubble. But then you also have wingnuts on both parties that shoot up softball games, a Bernie fan, that attack Rand Paul, that go and destroy cities during the summer. And my problem again goes back to, can we not all just look at this stuff and go, absolutely, that's horrible, shouldn't be done? And yes, Trump is responsible for raising the temperature of the conversation. So was Obama when you had riots going on during his. It can't be one way all the time. And the other side of it, there's some personal responsibility here too. If you're one of the people putting your feet up on somebody's desk inside the Capitol building, good luck going to jail. Good luck with that. That's what should happen to you. Just like if you're somebody throwing a rock through somebody's business in Atlanta, Georgia, or Minneapolis, or Chattanooga, you should go to jail. And you should be able to say that without having a party affiliation. That has nothing to do with party politics. That is called good human being shit. And if you can't just drop the veil of this is how I vote for a second and look at violence and go, you know what? That's not the way to solve it at this point. If you can't say that, then I really don't. I can't. It's hard for me to have a lot of respect moving forward with you. Let's pull this in here, Jay. And I'm sorry I'm ranting a little bit today, Eric, but I'm a little fired up. I apologize, man. The Trump Commission on Voter Fraud that was commissioned by him in 2016 was disbanded in 2018 without finding any systematic voter fraud. Look into it, many news source. I agree with that. But that means that's good then. That means all the stuff that Hillary and everybody was saying was probably not true. My point on that is I'm glad we asked the questions. And I don't think we should ask the question once every year or two. We should consistently ask those questions every time to make sure it's what we're supposed to do.
So, Jay, great point. What's changed since 2016? Well, we brought in the Dominion voting machines, which Elizabeth Warren said we should question. So did the judge in Atlanta. There's an HBO video about that. And we also, what changed was the dramatic increase in mail-in ballots. It doesn't mean there was fraud. It just means we should have questions. We should be allowed to ask questions to make sure that we trust it next time.
Yes.
So hopefully they'll look into that. I don't know if they will or not. Let me just say this. Trump kept to stop the steal going to continue to raise money is what Jay said. I think that's probably also true. Mm-hmm. Was that the only reason, or did he really think that maybe it was stolen? I don't know. I can't get inside his head. Either way, I think it was inappropriate for him to keep it going as long as he did. Let me just say this though, Clint. Mm-hmm. I think part of what let's tease this for next time, but let's start the conversation a little bit now, for about 5 or 10 minutes. Where do conservatives go from here? What happens next? I think the narrative that's being put around from the liberal media is that Trump incited an insurrection. He should be thrown in jail. He should be never be allowed to run for office again.
Well, they're going to try to impeach him.
Right, they're going to try to impeach him.
Yeah.
We'll see how that goes. I'm not going to opine about whether I think that's a good idea or a bad idea, because my point is, I was not a big fan of Trump. I didn't vote for him in 2016. And I have a good friend who also said the same thing, that the Democrats moved so far to the left lately that he went running into the arms of Trump. And Trump became the good alternative because the left Democrats had become so scary that more people were willing to vote for Trump. Whether you're a left-leaning person and you believe that or not, I can just say this: where do you think Trump found 74 million people, more than anybody who's ever voted for president in the past, and at any time other than the 80 million Biden just got? Where did they come from? Those are not. And if we can kind of agree that a lot of people think Trump has a horrible personality, that he's kind of a butthead, however you want to describe it. Why were 74 million people willing to vote for him is a question the Democrats should be asking, and we as Americans should be asking.
And how did he get more of the minority vote and help the economy like he did?
Well, that's a sub part of it is.
Yeah.
So he got, I think the number is they've determined now is 35% of the Latin vote, that he increased the African American vote for Republican. Some people are even theorizing that what happened in Georgia was without Trump on the top of the ticket, you lost the African American Republican vote, and that's one reason why they voted Democrat. If there's no Republican at the top of the ticket, the Trump-leaning African Americans didn't show up a week ago Tuesday. So there's all those questions. And so here's the more important question. Do the Republicans go back to being a minority party that can just sit back and yell and scream about everything's unfair and the Democrats are being mean? Or do the Republicans find a way to bring together effectively the Trump coalition, the Reagan Democrats, the blue collar voters that are pro-business, the blue collar working class people, the contractors, the factory workers, the famous story about the African American garbage collector in Brooklyn who wore a MAGA hat every day, that kind of stuff. So or at least he wore it some, and so is there a Republican out there that can get that kind of a base, but without the big flaws of Trump, without being an egomaniac, without being an or an unconstitutional, or I guess an indifferent to the constitutionalist?
Well, it's a convenient constitutionalist.
Convenient. When it helps me, sure. And so is there somebody who can take that role on in the Republican Party and continue to have a coalition of people? Because right now the Democrats have put together a weird coalition. There's a whole lot of the base are the lower income people who are more likely to appreciate the government helping them out. But then there's the middle class, I want to help people, so I'm a Democrat and I care about people crowd, which that's their right. That's fine. That happens to be something I disagree with because I think there's a better way to help people, but that's not the point of the discussion. On the Democrat side, there's I want to help people Democrats that are middle class and upper class. There's the poor people. And then there's all of a sudden in industry and in the big businesses, it's the pro-Democrats are now the big business people instead of being pro-Republican. Is that sort of because the crony capitalism and they found which side's going to win more, and so they're trying to protect themselves? Is it because they see the wave of the future? Why are big businesses all of a sudden pro-socialism? And that's another question. And how? So what are the lines? Who should be a Democrat and who should be a Republican? And is that different from who should support Trump or did support Trump? Is that populism only a Trump thing, or is that something the Democrats can replace? And if Trump is,
you mean the Republicans replace?
I mean the Republicans can replace. And if Trump is basically branded for life as being somebody that no matter, this is going to be hung around his neck, no matter how much we can talk about the details. At the end of the day, he screwed up. He allowed some stuff to happen, and a whole lot of people really think he's really bad, and the rest of us think he's really stupid. And
I think a lot of people who support the conservative movement are a little either should be disappointed in what they did or should be just worried. And here's me and you talked about this yesterday, Eric, and I've got two things I'll bring up as we start wrapping it up for another conversation. But one is, a year ago, I thought, looking at the Democrat Party, I thought to myself, they've got a line to draw, right? The principled Democrats versus the new wave of the extremists, which I call the Marxists or socialists, the people that have those tendencies. And I think they're out there. We can have a different conversation. But I'll be honest with you, in this a short time in this year, I think that it seems like the Democrats are willing to work more together through their differences to get the power. And then we'll see how they eat them. I'm already seeing how they eat themselves a little bit. But now I'm looking at the Republicans and I'm thinking, wait a minute. I think we're the ones now that have a line to decide if we're going to draw amongst ourselves or if we're going to put it aside. Because I am now clearly seeing conversations with conservatives based off I support Trump versus other people that say, well, I voted for Trump. And I only support Trump because he represented these policies and values. And now that I see it's okay to call him out. No, it's not. Yes, it is. And I see this infighting. So I agree with you. I think the Republican Party has, in my opinion, it's changed. I think the Republican Party has got to be the ones to figure out which side they're on. But I also think the Republicans have a lot of momentum if they can learn to fix this narrative and call BS for BS.
Hey, Clint, let's run through these last questions real quick.
And then we got, you know what we didn't talk about today? Censorship. What's gone on since January 6th to all the conservative platforms out there? And everybody goes, well, they were supporting violence. Got to be honest. You should be very, very scared. 1984, ladies and gentlemen.
I'll read this one. Ken Meyer, overall, the GOP won big on November 3rd. 0 losses in the U.S. House, 1 governor win, 2 legislative chambers flipped from Democrat to Republican, dozens, if not hundreds, of legislative seats flipped from Democrat to Republican. Setting the presidential race aside, the GOP
is strong. I'm assuming
is strong. Yep. The Georgia Senate race kind of undermines that a little bit, but at the same time, I mean, I'll say this. I'll say I lean Republican. I lean conservative. I'm more libertarian. But at the end of the day, I think the ideas of the Republicans are better ideas, and they are a better way to help everybody. That capitalism helps the most boats rise and gives people the most opportunities. Limited government is better than more government. That's one of the big fears. The Black Lives Matter people are scared of big government because the police are going to hurt them and do stuff to them. And the Trump people are afraid of big government because the government's going to come in and change their lives. One solution is less government. We can make the good arguments. The problem is we have a lot of do we make the emotional appeal as conservatives that get people to overlook our personality flaws?
Hey, real quick, let's read this one, and then I forgot one by Ronnie Dodd up here. So I'm a Republican and believe the party has some soul searching to do post-Trump. He was an aberration to the history of the party. I think he was, just between me and you and everybody listen, I think do I think he was needed a little bit to push back? Yes. I think Trump is a result of what happens when there's a huge group of people that feel that they're being called deplorables and they're clinging to their Bibles and their guns, which is a very simplistic way to pigeonhole people into this is who you are and saying that's all you are. I think that's a dangerous thing to get to.
And I think the Republicans have got to acknowledge they can't just pick the most establishment candidate. That Jeb Bush didn't have a chance. George W. Bush, nice guy. I would love to play golf with him or go ride bikes with him. But the most exciting thing that he did was pass Medicare Part D. I mean, that's not somebody that's going to rile up the base and go, hey, we're going to go change America.
Hey, what have you heard about the Insurrection Act was signed last night? I've not heard anything about
I've seen crap posted on social media, and I pray to God that is not true.
I do too.
For those of you who don't know what that's about, there's been a theory that as the election got close, Trump could prove that the election fraud changed the election and that he was going to use military tribunals to do something to the traitors who committed election fraud. I actually want to believe that is fifth column propaganda, that somebody is trying to make Trump look like he's even crazier than we think he is, because if he were to try to do something like that, we really are talking about a major civil war. He would lose any support from anybody, I think. And in fact, I would hope that they would not only impeach him, but have him in jail the second that he does that. But it's one of those things you see posted around some of those conspiracy type posters. I hope to God it's not true. I don't think it's true. And I don't think, after I served in the military and I have friends that did their 30-year careers, I have a couple people that are friends of mine that are flag officers. That's not something that the military is going to put up with. It's just not.
So here's what I don't understand. If he had that kind of proof, why would he not just say it out loud and let reporters go hound it down? I mean, even all it takes is one or two reporters. If you think all the media is against him, that's just not true. If he said stuff out loud, there are enough independent journalists that would want the scoop on that would go find it. And Unleash the Kraken was said for months, and there was no Kraken ever released. Even though the courts didn't hear the facts, they could have 100% said their facts in public opinion and put pressure.
Yeah. Using the military and tribunals, Insurrection Act, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
Pressing hard to get courts to pay attention to specific evidence that you might have, yes, at the right time. And the tricky part is, from the time of the election to gathering the evidence, 3 to 4 weeks, present it to the courts, but you got to get it all done by Christmas because everything shuts down, and then they have the electoral college votes counted on January 6th. So there's this limited window of time. So it's kind of hard to deal if there had actually been election fraud. I've read some of the complaints that were filed in Wisconsin, and the one in Georgia and the one in Michigan, especially the one in Georgia and the one in Michigan. There's a lot of detailed stuff that you're scratching your head going, if that's true, why didn't courts care? If that's true, why didn't we look into it more? And those are the legitimate questions I think we might have. Does it mean that I believe that the election was stolen? No. Does it mean that that Biden's not going to win? Absolutely not. The Electoral College was certified. The votes were certified and sent off. But does it mean we just stop asking questions?
No.
And everybody says, no, we need to figure out exactly what were those people talking about?
I want to tease this, Eric, with your opinion. I want to tease this next conversation. Censorship and the Republican Party moving forward are great topics. But are you worried about the aftermath of, again, let's put the pin in this little thought bubble. What happened January 6th? Horrible, tragic, criminal, 100% thumbs down, horrible thing. Don't minimize it. If you hated it from other people, you got to hate it when people that claim they believe what you believe, they do it. There's zero excuse for it. Now, since then, the censorship from big tech companies, even commercial companies that are saying we're not going to send money anymore to the Republican candidate. There is just this massive thing of censorship. And now these big tech companies are so part of our fabric and part of the government that I don't know. I mean, does it scare you to see the censorship going on, not just from President Trump, but for conservatives?
Oh, yeah, it scares me. And I think it's a good topic going forward. When George Floyd was killed, tragically, one of the people that worked for me said something pretty smart. She said, they took an issue that we can all agree on and divided us. Everybody agreed George Floyd's death was bad and that it should be punished and that it should be looked into. And if it was part of a system of police brutality or police racism, we should look into that. Then we divided as a nation on how our reaction was going to be. Well, this, I'm worried, is going to be the same thing. I think everybody agrees that what happened last Wednesday should be punished. Those people should go to jail. To the extent that President Trump incited it, that should be investigated, maybe punished. I just don't know enough of the facts. But what I'm afraid is going to happen is that the Democrats are going to use this as an opportunity for a power grab. That they're going to suggest that that people who are Republicans who supported Trump are all insurrectionists that are likely to fight back. We should take away their guns. We should take away their right to travel. We should take away their access to social media. Now, those sound like horrible conspiracy theories, especially in America, but by God, I've heard people asking for that stuff.
Absolutely. Well, and the flip side of it is data. Again, we go back to this. It's our problem because we really don't want to be wrong. When you have data that can clearly show how many unarmed people of any race are getting killed on a yearly basis, and you're basing a protest off that and the data doesn't support it, then that's got to change at least affect your opinion. The flip side of it is when you have a large group of your American fellow citizens screaming, going, our story's not getting heard. I'm talking about African Americans going, our story's not getting heard. I feel like it's getting minimalized. And if you're a conservative and you're not listening to that voice, two things can be true. The data doesn't support that if there is this thing where just, African Americans are just getting killed by police officers for willy-nilly. The data doesn't support it. The other part of that is that if you have a large group of people saying, hey, we feel treated different, for me as a white dude just to go, whatever, that's wrong too. You got to be able to sit down and shut your pie hole and listen to their story. And then together, if they trust you and you trust them, you can work through some solutions, which is what the country is set up to do. And we're shitting in it. All right, I'm sorry.
All right, Clint, we're almost done. I got to run.
Whatever.
I haven't done my commercial yet for Braver Angels, which is one place, braverangels.org, where we are trying to bring people together to work through these issues, to stop the polarization of our country, and to look for ways to have empathetic patriotism. And I also, if you'll go look on my Facebook page, there's something I just posted just yesterday. A friend of mine at Braver Angels gave me is a rabbi talking about how important it is for us to have a listening ear and be sympathetic and empathetic with the people that are hurting right now. And that's part of the problem, is there were a lot of people feeling like they weren't being heard, whether it's the Trump supporters who expected to have a chance to win this election and were being told it was stolen from them.
Shut up.
Don't tell them to shut up. This is what you need to understand, where they're coming from. Similarly, maybe even in some ways more compelling, is the Black Lives Matter people saying, hey, you don't understand what we have been through as African Americans. If you haven't had dark skin in America, you don't know what it's like to be pulled over by a police officer. You don't know what it's like to have to give your child the talk where they realize that they are treated differently in our country. And we all should have understanding for that, and sympathy and empathy. And we need to listen to each other more. And if we're just bickering about politics, we're just going to get divided farther apart.
Yeah, but I have a strange feeling that conversation's the same one that my dad gave me, and I'm white. It's do what they say, keep your hands on the wheel, don't be a smart ass, and don't break the law.
Yes, there's that argument, but that I will tell you that pisses off my African American friends.
Oh, I know.
Because that shows you're not listening to the special difference that they really, what's been different for them. And I'm talking
about the talk we have. I'm not talking about how the police respond.
Right. And right.
Yeah.
The point is we need to be more empathetic and understand when they say this is what life has been like for me and my family. And if you go back and look at what my life was like for my grandmother and my grandfather, no shit, that was different.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge that it was different and need to understand it. And it's hard to do.
And I think it actually makes you a good person. Not when you sit and listen without trying to defend it, you kind of go, which I just did. When you can sit and listen, it actually will instill a little bit of trust that you give a shit.
Go watch the video. It's only 6 minutes long. That's on my Facebook page from the rabbi that gives a good talk on that, way better than we could have.
And Dan Crenshaw's podcast.
And
Braver Angels.
Which is also the previous post on my Facebook page. All right, Glenn.
Sorry I talked so much today, dude. My bad. I was a little pent up.
Hopefully we'll get some other people on. And yes, be concerned about the censorship.
All right. Maybe next Monday, for sure next Monday, but we might do a special this week. I don't know. I got a lot of stuff to say.
Yeah.
The only person in my house is my dog to listen to me. So
I'm happy to do that. Let's find a time.
Go be a good guy. Talk to you later, Eric.
Thanks, Glenn. Good job. All right, see you. Bye.